The morning sun painted the Mediterranean waters in shades of gold when Lieutenant Sarah Chun stepped onto the deck of the research vessel Aurora. She had spent 3 years studying marine ecosystems, but today felt different. The crew seemed nervous, whispering in small groups and avoiding her gaze. Sarah had noticed strange patterns in the water samples over the past week. The chemical composition suggested something unusual was happening beneath the surface. Her reports to the Marine Biology Institute had gone unanswered, and her requests for additional equipment had been denied without explanation. Captain Rodriguez, a weathered man with 30 years at sea, approached her with a grim expression. "Dr. Chun, we need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He led her to his quarters, checking over his shoulder to ensure they weren't followed. "There are things happening out here that you weren't supposed to discover," he began, his hands trembling slightly as he poured himself a cup of coffee. "The samples you've been taking, the readings you've recorded, they show evidence of illegal dumping. But not just any dumping. Military-grade chemical waste that could poison these waters for decades." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had suspected the unusual readings meant something serious, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. "Who's responsible?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. The captain's face darkened. "A private military contractor called Blackwater Industries. They've been using these waters as their personal dumping ground for months. They have connections in high places, and they don't take kindly to people who threaten their operations." As if summoned by their conversation, the ship's radio crackled to life. A cold, professional voice filled the cabin. "Research vessel Aurora, this is Commander Harrison of Blackwater Industries. We understand you have a marine biologist aboard who has been taking unauthorized samples in our operational area." Sarah and the captain exchanged terrified glances. They had been monitoring their communications. The voice continued, "Dr. Chun, we know exactly who you are and what you've discovered. You have 2 choices: destroy your research and forget what you've seen, or face the consequences." The radio went silent, leaving only the sound of waves lapping against the hull. Sarah's mind raced. 3 years of research, evidence of environmental crimes that could affect millions of people. She couldn't just destroy it all. But she also understood the implied threat in the commander's words. "What do we do?" she whispered to Captain Rodriguez. Before he could answer, the ship shuddered violently. Through the porthole, they could see a sleek military patrol boat approaching at high speed, its weapons clearly visible on deck. The crew of the Aurora scrambled across the deck. Their earlier nervousness now transformed into outright panic. The patrol boat pulled alongside, and armed mercenaries in tactical gear began boarding the research vessel. Their leader, a tall man with cold eyes and a jagged scar across his left cheek, strode directly toward the captain's quarters. "Dr. Sarah Chun," he announced as he kicked open the door. "I am Commander Harrison. You've been conducting unauthorized research in restricted waters. Your samples and data will be confiscated, and you will be detained for questioning." Sarah stood her ground, though her heart was pounding. "These aren't restricted waters. This is international territory, and I have every right to conduct marine research here." Commander Harrison smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. "Rights are a luxury you can no longer afford, Doctor. You've seen things that could compromise important operations. Operations that protect national security." The mercenaries began searching the ship, confiscating equipment and destroying research materials. Sarah watched helplessly as months of work disappeared before her eyes. But what terrified her most was the way Harrison looked at her, like she was already dead. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in ominous shades of red and orange, Sarah realized that her discovery had put not just her career in jeopardy, but her life as well. The evidence she had gathered could expose environmental crimes worth millions of dollars, and powerful people would do anything to keep their secrets. Buried beneath the waves, the night ahead would test everything she believed about justice, survival, and the power of truth in a world where money and influence could silence anyone who dared to speak up. The interrogation room aboard the Blackwater vessel was small and windowless, lit by a single harsh fluorescent bulb. Sarah had been sitting in the metal chair for hours, her wrists bound with plastic zip ties that cut into her skin. Commander Harrison sat across from her, methodically cleaning his sidearm while asking the same questions over and over. "Where are the backup copies of your research?" he demanded for the 10th time. "We know marine biologists always keep multiple copies of their data. Cloud storage, external drives, research partners, where are they?" Sarah remained silent, staring at the blank wall behind Harrison's head. She had learned long ago that the best way to handle bullies was to deny them the reaction they craved. Every minute she delayed gave her colleagues back at the Institute more time to notice her disappearance. Harrison slammed his hand on the metal table, the sound echoing through the small space. "You think you're being heroic, don't you? Protecting the environment, saving the fish?" He leaned forward, his scarred face inches from hers. "Let me tell you what's really at stake here. Blackwater Industries has contracts worth $2 billion. We provide security services that keep terrorists from attacking cargo ships in these waters. Your little research project threatens operations that save lives by poisoning the ocean." Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady despite her fear. "I've seen your security operations. Dumping chemical waste isn't protecting anyone. It's slowly killing everything that lives in these waters." Harrison's laugh was cold and humorless. "The greater good sometimes requires difficult choices, Doctor. A few dead fish versus preventing terrorist attacks. The math is simple." Through the thin walls of the interrogation room, Sarah could hear the crew preparing for something. Heavy equipment was being moved across the deck, and she caught fragments of conversations about coordinates and disposal protocols. Her blood ran cold as she realized what they were planning. "You can't just make me disappear," she said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "People know where I am. The Research Institute will send search parties." Harrison stood up and holstered his weapon. "Actually, they already received a message from your satellite phone. You decided to extend your research trip for another 2 weeks. Unfortunately, accidents happen at sea. Equipment failures, storms, inexperienced researchers making fatal mistakes." The door opened and 2 mercenaries entered. Their faces were hidden behind tactical masks, but Sarah could see their eyes. Cold, professional, and completely without mercy. They had done this before. "Take her to the deck," Harrison ordered. "Prepare the weights. Make sure everything looks natural." As the mercenaries grabbed her arms and dragged her from the chair, Sarah's mind raced through her options. The ship was miles from shore, surrounded by dark water that stretched to the horizon. Even if she somehow escaped her restraints, where could she run? The night air hit her face as they emerged onto the deck. The Blackwater vessel was larger than she had realized, equipped with sophisticated communication arrays and what looked like military-grade weapon systems. This wasn't just a patrol boat. It was a floating command center for illegal operations throughout the region. "Dr. Chun," Harrison called from behind her, "I want you to understand that this isn't personal. You're simply in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong information. In another life, we might have been on the same side." The mercenaries forced her to the edge of the deck, where a section of railing had been removed. Below, the Mediterranean stretched endlessly, its dark surface reflecting the stars like scattered diamonds. Heavy chains had been prepared, designed to ensure that anything thrown overboard would never resurface. "Any last words?" Harrison asked, almost politely. Sarah looked out at the vast expanse of water, thinking of all the marine life she had studied and protected throughout her career. Somewhere beneath those waves, illegal chemicals were spreading through the ecosystem like a slow poison, killing creatures that had survived for millions of years. "The truth has a way of surfacing," she said quietly, "no matter how deep you try to bury it." Harrison nodded to his men. "Deep enough." But as the mercenaries moved to attach the weights to Sarah's restraints, a new sound cut through the night air, the low, rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors approaching from the north. The sound was different from civilian aircraft, more purposeful and aggressive. Harrison spun around, grabbing binoculars from a nearby equipment case. Through the darkness, running lights became visible, approaching fast and low over the water. This wasn't part of their plan. "Sir, one of the mercenaries called out, his voice tight with concern. We're picking up multiple aircraft on radar. Military signatures. The helicopter sounds grew louder, joined by the rumble of powerful boat engines cutting through the water at high speed. Whatever was coming their way, it was coming fast. And it was coming in force. Harrison lowered his binoculars, his face pale in the deck lights. How did they find us? As if in answer to his question, a powerful searchlight suddenly blazed to life, illuminating the entire Blackwater vessel in brilliant white light. Through the glare, Sarah could see the outline of a military helicopter hovering just beyond the range of the ship's weapons. A voice boomed across the water through a powerful loudspeaker. Calm and professional. This is the United States Navy. You are engaged in illegal activities in international waters. Prepare to be boarded. Chaos erupted across the Blackwater vessel as Harrison screamed orders into his radio. His mercenaries scattered across the deck, taking defensive positions behind equipment and preparing weapons. The professional composure they had maintained during Sarah's interrogation evaporated as they faced the reality of confronting actual military forces. This is international waters. Harrison shouted into his radio transmitter, trying to reach whoever was coordinating the approaching forces. We are conducting legitimate security operations under contract with maritime shipping companies. You have no authority here. The response came swift and cold through the loudspeaker. Commander Harrison, you are ordered to stand down immediately. Release Dr. Sarah Chun and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force. Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. Someone had come for her, but the standoff could easily turn deadly. The mercenaries around her were heavily armed and clearly prepared to fight rather than face whatever consequences awaited them in custody. Harrison grabbed Sarah roughly by the arm, dragging her toward the ship's command center. You did this somehow, he snarled. You found a way to signal them? I've been your prisoner for hours, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. How could I have contacted anyone? But even as she spoke, she remembered something. 3 days ago, she had installed a new emergency beacon in her research equipment, a device designed to automatically transmit distress signals if it detected unusual stress patterns in her vital signs. The intense fear she had experienced during the interrogation might have triggered the system. The helicopter's searchlight tracked their movement across the deck, keeping them illuminated while additional aircraft took positions around the vessel. Sarah could now see at least 3 military helicopters and hear the engines of fast-moving patrol boats approaching from multiple directions. This was a coordinated operation involving significant resources. Sir, one of the mercenaries called from the communications station. We're being jammed. All our satellite links are down, and radar is showing at least 6 vessels converging on our position. Harrison's face twisted with rage and desperation. He had built his career on operating in the shadows, using corruption and intimidation to avoid accountability. Now he was trapped in the open, facing professional military forces that couldn't be bribed or threatened. Prepare the scuttling charges, he ordered. If we can't escape, we destroy everything. The ship, the evidence, all of it goes to the bottom. Sarah's blood ran cold. She had seen enough action movies to know what scuttling charges were: explosives designed to sink a ship completely, leaving no evidence behind. Harrison was prepared to commit murder-suicide rather than face justice for his crimes. The first military patrol boat pulled alongside the Blackwater vessel, and Sarah could see figures in tactical gear preparing to board. But these weren't ordinary sailors or Marines. Their equipment was too advanced, their movements too coordinated. Even in the darkness, she could see the distinctive trident patches on their uniforms, Navy SEALs. Harrison, the loudspeaker voice called again, but this time it was different, more personal, with an edge of controlled anger. This is Commander Marcus Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs. I believe you have something that belongs to us. Harrison's face went white. Rodriguez, he whispered, as if the name carried some terrible significance. You know him? Sarah asked. Rodriguez was my partner 15 years ago, Harrison said, his voice hollow. Before I went private. Before I started working for people who paid better than the government. He looked at Sarah with something that might have been regret. He always said the water would judge us all in the end. The first SEAL team was now boarding the vessel, moving with the fluid precision of warriors who had trained together for years. They advanced across the deck like shadows, neutralizing Harrison's mercenaries with non-lethal weapons and advanced tactics. The hired guns, despite their equipment and training, were no match for elite special forces operating as a coordinated unit. "This is your last warning, Harrison," Commander Rodriguez's voice echoed across the water. "Release Dr. Chun immediately and surrender yourself and your crew. You have 30 seconds to comply." Harrison looked around desperately, realizing his position was hopeless. His mercenaries were already being detained by the SEALs, and more military personnel were boarding every second. The sophisticated weapon systems he had relied on were useless against an enemy that had appeared from multiple directions simultaneously. "You don't understand," Harrison called out, still holding Sarah as a human shield. "The operations we're protecting, they're worth billions. The people I work for won't let this end here. They have resources, connections in government, influence that reaches higher than you can imagine." Commander Rodriguez appeared at the edge of the deck, having climbed aboard while Harrison was distracted. He was a tall, powerfully built man with graying hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had faced danger countless times and never backed down. "Harrison," he said calmly, "in 30 years of service, I've learned something important. The ocean doesn't care about your connections, your money, or your influence. It only cares about truth. And the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it." Those were almost exactly the words Sarah had spoken to Harrison just minutes before. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "Dr. Chun," Commander Rodriguez continued, his eyes never leaving Harrison, "I'm going to need you to move away from him very slowly. We have this situation under control." But Harrison wasn't finished fighting. With the desperation of a cornered animal, he reached for the detonator to the scuttling charges, apparently preferring to destroy everything rather than face the consequences of his actions. The next few seconds would determine whether justice prevailed or whether the evidence of environmental crimes would disappear forever beneath the dark waters of the Mediterranean. Time seemed to slow as Harrison's hand moved toward the detonator. Sarah could see the desperate calculation in his eyes. If he couldn't escape justice, he would ensure that no evidence of his crimes survived. The scuttling charges would send the ship and everyone aboard to the bottom of the Mediterranean, creating a tragedy that would bury the truth forever, but Commander Rodriguez had anticipated this move. Even as Harrison reached for the device, a red laser dot appeared on his forehead. A SEAL sniper, positioned on one of the helicopters overhead, had him in perfect crosshairs. The message was clear. Any sudden movement would be his last. "Think about what you're doing, Harrison," Rodriguez said calmly, taking a step closer. "You press that button, and you're not just killing yourself." "Dr. Chun, my team, your own crew, everyone dies? Is protecting your corporate sponsors really worth all those lives?" Harrison's hand trembled over the detonator. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. "You don't understand the forces at play here, Marcus. The people I work for, they own judges, senators, military contractors. Even if you arrest me tonight, I'll be free within a week. The charges will disappear, the evidence will be ruled inadmissible, and I'll go back to business as usual." "Maybe," Rodriguez acknowledged. "But Dr. Chun's research will still be out there? The water samples she collected, the chemical analysis, the photographic evidence, that doesn't disappear just because you have powerful friends." Sarah realized this was her moment to speak. Despite her terror, she forced herself to stand straight and address Harrison directly. 3 days ago, I uploaded everything to a secure server maintained by the International Marine Protection Agency. The data includes GPS coordinates of every illegal dumping site, chemical signatures that can be traced back to specific military contractors, and time-stamped evidence of environmental crimes spanning 6 months. It was a bluff, but a convincing one. Harrison's face went pale as he processed the implications. Even if he destroyed the ship and killed everyone aboard, the evidence would still surface through international environmental organizations that operated beyond the reach of American corporate influence. "You're lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Sarah asked. "Check your intelligence files. 3 days ago, there was a data transmission from my research equipment to a satellite uplink. Your people probably assumed it was routine scientific communication. They were wrong." Commander Rodriguez seized the moment of doubt. "Harrison, you're a smart man. You know when you're beaten. The question now is whether you want to face justice with some dignity intact, or whether you want to be remembered as the coward who murdered innocent people to protect his profit margins." The standoff continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Around them, the SEALs maintained their positions with professional patience, ready to act at an instant's notice. The helicopter spotlight continued to bathe the scene in harsh white light, turning the deck into a stage, where a decade of corruption and environmental crime was finally being exposed. Harrison looked around at the faces surrounding him, his captured mercenaries, the determined SEALs, and Sarah herself, the marine biologist whose dedication to truth had brought down his entire operation. Finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat. "I want a lawyer," he said quietly, slowly moving his hand away from the detonator. "And I want protection. The people I worked for don't tolerate failure." Rodriguez nodded to his team, and 2 SEALs immediately moved forward to secure Harrison and the explosive device. "You'll get both," Rodriguez promised. "But first, you're going to tell us everything about the illegal dumping operations. Every location, every chemical compound, every corporate contact who authorized environmental crimes." As Harrison was led away in restraints, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe freely for the first time in hours. The nightmare was over, but she knew the real work was just beginning. The evidence she had gathered would need to be processed through international courts, environmental agencies, and criminal justice systems that moved slowly even under the best circumstances. "Dr. Chun," Commander Rodriguez approached her as medics checked her for injuries. "I need to apologize. We've been tracking Harrison's operations for months, but we didn't know about your research until your emergency beacon activated. If we had acted sooner—" "You saved my life," Sarah interrupted. "How did you respond so quickly?" Rodriguez smiled grimly. "When a civilian scientist discovers military-grade environmental crimes, it becomes a matter of national security. We had a task force standing by, waiting for any opportunity to move against Blackwater Industries. Your distress signal gave us the justification we needed to act." As Sarah was helped aboard the SEAL patrol boat, she looked back at the Blackwater vessel being secured by military personnel. Evidence technicians were already photographing everything, documenting the criminal operation that had been hidden beneath the waves. Tomorrow, the story would make international headlines. But tonight, she was simply grateful to be alive. The Mediterranean waters that had nearly become her grave now reflected the lights of justice prevailing over corruption. But Sarah knew that Harrison had spoken the truth about one thing: the people behind. Blackwater Industries wouldn't accept this defeat quietly. The real battle for environmental justice was just beginning. Commander Rodriguez joined her at the boat's railing as they headed toward the nearest military base. "Dr. Chun, I want you to know that what you did tonight took extraordinary courage. But I also want you to understand that this won't end here. Harrison's arrest is just the beginning." Sarah nodded, watching the dark waters pass beneath them. Somewhere below the surface, illegal chemicals continued to spread through the ecosystem, and somewhere above, powerful people were already planning their response to this setback. The fight to protect the ocean would continue long after tonight's victory. 6 weeks after Harrison's arrest, Sarah sat in a sterile conference room at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, surrounded by lawyers, environmental experts, and government officials from 12 different countries. The evidence she had gathered in the Mediterranean had triggered the largest environmental crime investigation in maritime history. But the victory felt hollow. Despite the mountain of evidence against Blackwater Industries, their executives remained free, protected by legal technicalities and political influence that seemed to stretch. into every corner of the international justice system. 3 key witnesses had mysteriously changed their testimony. Crucial documents had been ruled inadmissible due to jurisdictional disputes, and the corporation's lawyers had successfully argued that their clients were merely following government contracts that authorized the dumping. Dr. Chun, the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena Vasquez, leaned forward across the conference table. I need you to understand our position. The evidence you gathered is absolutely solid from a scientific standpoint. We can prove environmental damage, we can trace the chemical signatures, we can demonstrate a pattern of illegal dumping spanning multiple countries. But, Sarah asked, though she already knew what was coming, but Blackwater Industries didn't act alone. The documents we've recovered show direct authorization from military contractors working for the U.S., French, and Italian governments. The dumping operations were officially classified as strategic waste disposal, under maritime security protocols that technically exist in legal gray areas. Sarah felt sick. So they're going to walk free because they had government permission. To poison the ocean? It's more complicated than that, another layer interjected. The governments involved claim they weren't fully informed about the environmental impact. The military contractors claim they were just following orders. Blackwater claims they were just implementing government policy. Everyone has plausible deniability. Through the conference room windows, Sarah could see protesters gathering in the square outside. Environmental activists from around the world had come to The Hague demanding justice, carrying signs with photographs of dead marine life and contaminated beaches. The case had become a symbol of corporate impunity in the face of environmental destruction, Elena Vasquez continued. However, there is one avenue we haven't fully explored. Commander Harrison has agreed to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for reduced charges. He's provided us with detailed information about Blackwater's operations throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. A new voice spoke from the back of the room. That's where we come in. Sarah turned to see Commander Rodriguez entering the conference room, wearing his dress uniform and carrying a thick file folder. With him was a woman she didn't recognize, tall, athletic, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Dr. Chun, I'd like you to meet Captain Lisa Martinez, commanding officer of SEAL Team 7. Captain Martinez has been investigating Blackwater Industries for 3 years as part of a joint task force focusing on environmental crimes committed under the cover of military contracts. Captain Martinez opened her file folder and spread photographs across the conference table. The images showed illegal dumping operations in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans, a global network of environmental crime that dwarfed what Sarah had discovered in the Mediterranean. What you found, Dr. Chun, was just one small piece of a much larger operation, Martinez explained. Blackwater Industries has been using military contracts as cover for illegal waste disposal operations worth over $5 billion. They're not just dumping chemicals, they're dumping nuclear waste, biological weapons components, and toxic materials that could contaminate ocean ecosystems for centuries. Sarah studied the photographs with growing horror. The scope of the operation was staggering: dozens of ships, hundreds of dumping sites, and evidence of environmental crimes on a scale that threatened the entire ocean ecosystem. Why hasn't this been stopped before now? She asked. Because it's been protected at the highest levels, Rodriguez replied grimly. Blackwater has contracts with intelligence agencies, military organizations, and corporate interests that span multiple countries. Every time we've tried to move against them, the operation gets shut down due to national security concerns. Elena Vasquez looked up from the new evidence. But things are different now. Dr. Chun's research provided independent scientific verification of the environmental damage. The international attention this case has generated makes it politically impossible to simply cover up the crimes. Captain Martinez leaned forward. We have a plan, but it's dangerous and we need your help. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of plan? Blackwater is planning one final massive dumping operation. Next week, hundreds of tons of nuclear waste from decommissioned submarines. The location is the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean. If they succeed, the contamination could spread throughout the Pacific, affecting marine life from Alaska to Australia. Rodriguez added, "Our intelligence indicates that high-ranking officials from multiple governments will be present to witness the operation. It's their way of demonstrating that they can continue their crimes with impunity." "We're going to stop them," Martinez said firmly. "But we need a marine biologist on the team to document the environmental crimes in real time. Evidence that can't be dismissed or ruled inadmissible." Sarah looked around the conference room at the faces of people who had devoted their careers to environmental justice. Outside, the protesters continued their vigil, demanding accountability for crimes against the planet itself. "What you're asking," she said slowly, "it sounds like you're planning some kind of military operation." "I'm a scientist, not a soldier." "You're the scientist who risked her life to expose environmental crimes," Martinez replied. "You're the person who gathered evidence that even Blackwater's lawyers can't refute. And you're the only marine biologist who has direct experience with their illegal operations." Elena Vasquez added, "If we can document this final dumping operation and arrest the government officials involved, we can break the entire network. No more legal technicalities, no more jurisdictional disputes, no more claims of national security." Sarah thought about the dead marine life she had seen in her research, the contaminated water samples that showed decades of slow poisoning, and the vast network of environmental crimes that threatened every ocean on Earth. The choice seemed clear, but the risks were enormous. "When do we leave?" she asked. The nuclear submarine USS Leviathan cut through the dark waters of the Pacific like a steel predator, running silent beneath the surface as it approached the coordinates where Blackwater Industries planned their final, most devastating dumping operation. Sarah had never imagined she would find herself aboard a military vessel. But the past 3 weeks of intensive preparation had transformed her, from a marine biologist into something approaching a covert operative. Commander Rodriguez stood beside her in the submarine's command center, studying sonar readings that showed multiple surface vessels converging on their target area. "5 ships confirmed," he reported to Captain Martinez. 3 Blackwater vessels, 1 research ship flying under a false flag, and what appears to be a luxury yacht, probably carrying the government officials who want to witness this operation. Sarah examined the underwater topography displayed on the navigation screens. The Mariana Trench stretched below them like a wound in the ocean floor, its depth so profound that anything dumped there would remain hidden for geological ages. The perfect crime scene for environmental destruction on a massive scale. Dr. Chun, Captain Martinez, appeared beside her, wearing the specialized diving gear that all team members would use for the underwater phase of the operation. "Are you ready for this? Once we begin, there's no turning back. We'll be documenting environmental crimes in international waters while facing armed resistance from corporate mercenaries and potentially corrupt government officials." Sarah nodded, though her stomach churned with nervousness. The past weeks had included intensive training in underwater photography, evidence collection, and emergency procedures that she had never imagined needing as a marine biologist. "The sampling equipment is calibrated and ready. I can document chemical signatures in real time and transmit the data directly to international monitoring stations." Through the submarine's periscope, they could see the Blackwater fleet beginning their operation. Massive cargo containers were being lowered into the water, each one containing radioactive waste that would contaminate the ocean ecosystem for thousands of years. The scale of the environmental crime was staggering, enough nuclear material to poison entire ocean currents. "Intelligence update," Rodriguez announced, receiving a coded message through the submarine's communication system. "We've confirmed the identities of the government officials aboard the luxury yacht. Deputy Secretary of Defense Margaret Harrison, French Maritime Security Director Claude Beaumont, and Italian Environmental Commissioner Sofia Romano. All 3 have been secretly authorizing illegal dumping operations for years." Sarah felt a surge of anger. These were people entrusted with protecting their nations and the environment, yet they were personally overseeing crimes that threatened the entire planet. The corruption reached higher than anyone had imagined. SEAL Team 7, prepare for deployment, Captain Martinez ordered. Dr. Chun, you'll be with the documentation team. Stay close to Rodriguez and focus on gathering evidence. Leave the fighting to us. The submarine rose silently toward the surface as the SEAL team prepared their specialized underwater vehicles. Sarah checked her equipment one final time: waterproof cameras, chemical analysis sensors, and communication devices that would broadcast her findings to environmental organizations around the world in real time. As they breached the surface under cover of darkness, Sarah could see the Blackwater operation in progress. Powerful searchlights illuminated the dumping site, and she could hear the mechanical sounds of crane operations lowering radioactive containers into the deepest part of the ocean. The efficiency of the operation suggested they had done this many times before. "This is Commander Rodriguez," she heard through her communication headset. "All teams, initiate Operation Deep Clean, Dr. Chun. Begin documentation Phase 1. Sarah activated her recording equipment and began photographing the illegal dumping operation, making sure to capture the identification numbers on the containers, the faces of the personnel involved, and the sophisticated equipment being used to lower nuclear waste into the Mariana Trench. Every image would serve as evidence in international court proceedings, but as she worked, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The containers being dumped weren't just filled with nuclear waste from decommissioned submarines. Some of them bore the markings of biological weapons research facilities. Others showed chemical weapon disposal codes. Blackwater wasn't just dumping radioactive material. They were disposing of the most dangerous substances ever created by human civilization. "Rodriguez," she whispered into her headset, "this is worse than we thought. They're dumping biological and chemical weapons along with the nuclear waste. The contamination potential is catastrophic." "Copy that, Dr. Chun. Continue documentation. We need every detail." Through her camera lens, Sarah watched as government officials aboard the luxury yacht toasted their success with champagne, celebrating the disposal of evidence that could have exposed decades of illegal weapons research. The casual cruelty of the scene, powerful people celebrating environmental destruction, filled her with determination to see justice served, but the operation was far from over. As Sarah continued documenting the crimes, alarms began sounding across the Blackwater fleet. Someone had detected the submarine's presence, and the corporate mercenaries were preparing for battle. "All teams," Captain Martinez's voice crackled through the communication system. "We've been compromised. Prepare for hostile contact. Dr. Chun, get that evidence transmitted immediately. If we don't make it out of here, the world needs to know what we've discovered." Sarah's fingers flew across her equipment controls, uploading the photographic evidence and chemical analysis data to satellite links that would distribute the information to environmental organizations, news media, and international courts simultaneously. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, the truth about Blackwater's crimes would survive. The first explosions lit up the night sky as Blackwater's armed vessels opened fire on the submarine. But the SEALs had anticipated resistance, and their counterattack was swift and devastating. Specialized weapons designed for maritime operations disabled the corporate vessel's engines and communication systems, leaving them dead in the water. "Government yacht is attempting to flee," Rodriguez reported. "Should we pursue?" Captain Martinez's response was immediate and decisive. "Negative. Our mission is evidence gathering, not capture. Dr. Chun, what's the status on your documentation?" "Complete upload achieved," Sarah replied, watching her equipment confirm that the evidence had been successfully transmitted to monitoring stations around the world. The entire operation is now documented and distributed through international networks. As dawn broke over the Pacific, the illegal dumping operation lay in ruins. Blackwater's vessels were disabled, their personnel detained, and most importantly, irrefutable evidence of their crimes was already spreading across global communication networks. The luxury yacht carrying corrupt government officials had escaped, but their participation in environmental crimes was now documented beyond any possibility of denial. But Sarah knew that the real battle was just beginning. The evidence had been gathered, But ensuring that justice prevailed would require courage, persistence, and the willingness to face powerful enemies who would stop at nothing to protect their profits and political positions. 1 year later, Sarah stood before the United Nations Environmental Assembly in New York. Addressing representatives from every nation on Earth, the packed auditorium fell silent as she began her testimony. The same voice that had once whispered defiant words to Commander Harrison now carrying across the world stage with quiet authority. "Honorable delegates," she began, "the evidence we present today represents the largest environmental crime investigation in maritime history. The illegal dumping operations conducted by Blackwater Industries and their government collaborators have contaminated ocean ecosystems spanning 3 continents and threatening marine life that has existed for millions of years." Behind her, massive screens displayed the photographs she had taken during the Mariana Trench operation, images that had shocked the world when they first appeared on international news networks. The visual evidence of nuclear waste, biological weapons components, and chemical toxins being dumped into the deepest parts of the ocean had triggered environmental protests in every major city and forced governments to acknowledge crimes they had previously denied. In the audience, she could see familiar faces that told the story of justice slowly prevailing over corruption. Commander Rodriguez sat with the U.S. delegation, having been promoted to admiral after his role in exposing military contractor fraud. Captain Martinez was there as well, now heading the Navy's new Environmental Crimes Task Force. Most importantly, Elena Vasquez sat at the prosecutor's table, preparing to announce the international arrest warrants that would finally hold powerful criminals accountable. The past year had been a whirlwind of testimony, evidence analysis, and legal proceedings that spanned multiple countries. Blackwater Industries had been formally dissolved, its assets seized to fund ocean cleanup operations. Commander Harrison had provided detailed testimony about the extent of the illegal dumping network, revealing crimes that stretched back decades and involved hundreds of government officials and corporate executives, but the most significant breakthrough had come when the luxury yacht passengers were finally identified and arrested. Deputy Secretary of Defense Margaret Harrison had been found guilty of environmental crimes and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. French Maritime Security Director Claude Beaumont had fled to a country without extradition treaties, but international warrants ensured he could never return to legitimate government service. Italian Environmental Commissioner Sofia Romano had agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for reduced charges, providing evidence that implicated environmental criminals throughout Europe. "The ocean remembers everything," Sarah continued her testimony, echoing the words Commander Rodriguez had spoken during that tense confrontation in the Mediterranean. "Chemical signatures persist in marine ecosystems for decades. Marine life carries evidence of contamination in their tissues. Ocean currents distribute pollutants across vast distances, creating environmental consequences that affect every nation represented in this assembly." She activated a laser pointer and highlighted areas on a world map showing the spread of contamination from illegal dumping sites. "The cleanup operations we've initiated will take generations to complete. Some areas of the ocean may never fully recover from the damage caused by decades of corporate crime conducted under the cover of military contracts." Elena Vasquez rose from the prosecutor's table to address the assembly. "Dr. Chin's courage in exposing these crimes has enabled us to achieve unprecedented accountability for environmental destruction. Today, I am pleased to announce that the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for 47 individuals involved in illegal ocean dumping operations, including current and former government officials from 6 countries. The announcement triggered a wave of applause that lasted several minutes. Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and soberness. Justice was being served, but the environmental damage would persist for decades. The victory was real but incomplete. After the session ended, Sarah found herself on the UN building's observation deck, looking out over New York Harbor. The water appeared clean and peaceful, but she knew that appearances could be deceiving. Her scientific training had taught her to look beneath the surface, to understand the hidden currents and chemical processes that determined the health of marine ecosystems. Commander Rodriguez, now Admiral Rodriguez, joined her at the railing. Any regrets about leaving pure research for environmental activism? He asked. Tatsera considered the question carefully. I never intended to become an activist. I just wanted to study marine biology and contribute to scientific knowledge. But when you discover crimes that threaten the entire ocean ecosystem, you can't just publish a research paper and hope someone else takes action. The ocean chose you, Rodriguez observed. Just like it chose our team to be in the right place at the right time to stop Blackwater's final operation. They stood in comfortable silence, watching boats move through the harbor. Each vessel reminded Sarah of the complex relationship between human activity and ocean health, the need for maritime commerce balanced against the imperative to protect marine ecosystems. What's next? Rodriguez asked. Sarah smiled, thinking about the research institute she was establishing with funding from Blackwater's seized assets. We're creating an international monitoring system for ocean contamination, satellites, underwater sensors, and rapid response teams that can detect environmental crimes before they cause permanent damage. The technology exists to protect the oceans, but only if we have the political will to use it. As the sun set over New York Harbor, painting the water in shades of gold and orange, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A routine research mission had become a fight for environmental justice, transforming her from a quiet scientist into a voice for ocean protection recognized around the world. The waves lapped against the harbor walls with the same eternal rhythm they had maintained for millions of years before human civilization, and would continue for millions of years after. But now, for the first time in decades, those waters carried a little less poison, a little more hope. The ocean had indeed chosen its champions, and they had proven themselves worthy of its trust. The fight for environmental justice would continue, but the tide had turned. Truth had surfaced from the deepest places, bringing with it the power to heal a wounded world.